Now, I know many of you in management have already covered information management, right? So we're going to look at unpacking first the means of working or operational definition to help you, right, with your study. And that's where we're going to go with information management. I have to acknowledge that I am looking for a library information studies or information science scholar. So my aim will not be the business management, angle. It'll be the management, it'll be rather the information management perspective that says that as a scholar and as a researcher, you have to manage your information source. That's the angle, and that's my disclaimer up front. I want the session to be very interactive. I know we only have an hour and a half to cover a vast topic. So when I'm talking, unfortunately I'm stuck behind a podium in terms of this particular venue. Please don't at any point raise your hand, right? The session is here for you. You need to take out as much as possible from the session. Okay? Any comments or questions before we start? Now, okay? I need to ask you some questions just to see where you are, right? As an audience. How many of you, and of course without violating the UK research ethics policy, right? How many of you are first time registrations? Just raise your hand. Okay. So the rest of you are subsequent registrations. How many of you have then defended your proposal? Okay. Right? So how many of you then are full-time PhD students? Let's see. Okay, the lucky people. Right? So how many of you are holding a job and trying to study and be, okay, let's see, and apply. Right. So that's a journey for most of us in South Africa when we undertake PhD. So how many of us then, okay, basically, how many of us, when we say full-time employment, are actually trying to do this then in a part-time basis? And I say this in inverted commas, so think of your hands. Okay, right. So that gives me a sense of where we are, okay, in terms of where you are in your journey with your PhD study. So let's get into it. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at what information management is. We're then going to move on and we're going to look at information management and the link to information literacy. From there, we'll link information management, information literacy and digital literacy, which is the latest trend in terms of competencies and skills. And then we're going to map those information management skills to a doctoral study. And then I'm going to provide you finally with some useful tips. So your success as a PhD student is really dependent on your information management knowledge and skills. And the reason I say this is that when we start the study, nobody tells us that we're going to have to actually manage our information resources. When we start out, we know that we just have to formulate a research topic, unpack the research problem, get into the conceptual or theoretical framework, do the literature review, right? Adopt the appropriate methodology, do our analysis, present our findings, interpret them, discuss them, recommend, do conclusions, and allude to any further research that we, for instance, right, cannot do in terms of the study. Just forgive us, we've got some technical glitches with the presentation, but it's going to be sorted out for us. So while they're sorting that out, what we can do is perhaps I can ask you, from your perspective, how would you define, okay, information management? Any thoughts? What comes to mind when somebody says information management? What is your understanding? Managing the information. Managing the information? So what does that actually tell?
Yeah, I think it should be also about storing information for future retrieval use.
Okay, so manage some of the aspects of storing that information, right, so that you can use it in the future. Gathering, right? And hang on to the terminology. Somebody used the term gathering data. Very interesting. He didn't say gather information. He said gather data. Right? The information, data, gather it, store it, what else? The reality is that you've been doing this subconsciously already. Right? Reference it, lovely, what else? Use it systematically. What do you mean by systematically? Okay. So systematically you're going to sift through and say this is relevant, this is not relevant. Okay. So there's some form of analysis in it. Very good. Anybody else? Use it to get what you need. Very important to meet that information need. Alright? Because as a doctoral student, you have a need. And it's referred to as an information need. Because your existing knowledge cannot answer, right, or solve the research problem that you have chosen or facing. Let's be honest. Right? So you have this, what we call a knowledge gap. And to fill that knowledge gap, you now have an information need that arises. And what you want to do then is locate other information resources to fill that knowledge gap, essentially. And that's the information need that we speak of. I also want to say that I teach information behavior, right, and ethics in my program. So the ethical use of that information is also going to be vitally important, and we will touch on it today as well. So without you consciously thinking about it, the management of those information resources that you come across, that you actively go out and search for, is critical for your PhD study. And they're very sourced, and there are different types of knowledge, right? And there's another term now, we spoke of data, we spoke of information, and we spoke of knowledge, right? We're going to have to know the difference between those three terms, essentially, when we are looking at information management, right? While we are busy sorting this out, let me just move to my next slide. Right, so essentially we are stuck then with what we call, right, so what we're stuck is what we call the terminological turmoil. How many people are coming from a management background? Anybody doing from the management discipline? 1, 2, 3. Okay, so for you guys, you may be familiar with some of this terminology. And coupled with the terminology that we're facing here, we're also facing what we call information overload. That's the reality. We've got so much coming at us at once. It doesn't make it easy for us to decide what's relevant, right? So we need a set of core competencies and skills. So we speak of, earlier we mentioned the key concepts that we're going to unpack, right? Information, data management, knowledge management, right? Information resource management, information systems management, knowledge resource management, etc., etc., etc. So there's all these terms out there, okay, that we face. But the best way to do this, like I said, is let's unpack information. If we start there, it's going to be easier for us to understand the process. So what is information? Any thoughts? Any takers on what information is? Just now you were saying it's what we need. Without it, I'm not going to be able to graduate with this PhD. It's knowledge, right? Anybody else? Somebody said it's all those resources that I consult, that I need to work through. Accumulated data. Anybody else? Process data. Okay? Harold, have you got your hand up? No. Okay, he doesn't have his hand up. I thought he did. He stuck it up, right? So, essentially, if we unpack it, we're going to find, if you do the Google search, right now, as PhD scholars, we know that we've got to move beyond the Google search, but that's where most scholars start. If you look for a definition of information or information management, you're going to find that there's no universally accepted definition, right? And that's the reality. If you look at the origin of the word, it comes from a verb, so it means that it requires an action on our part, right? And informare means to inform, to make sense, to discipline, to instruct, or to teach, for example. So let's look at the processes now. We've got data, we've got information, and we've got knowledge. So what are the differences? Because some of you mentioned this. Some said it's knowledge, some said information, some said it's data. So what is the difference? Are there differences between those concepts? What transformations are happening, if there are those differences? And what changes are happening, if there is the difference between those concepts? I want to apologize for the PowerPoint. It's not the lens. We're struggling with the lens on the data projector. And is there a model to explain the differences between these concepts? So here's the model. Anybody come across this model before? Okay, it's called the DIKW pyramid or model. And essentially what it's saying is that the signals that we get, we look up there, we see a red light, it says exit, right? There's a red light. So those signals present themselves as raw facts or figures, and they are the data. Once we add context and structure to the data, we then arrive at information. Once we add meaning to the information, we arrive at knowledge. And once we add insight to that, we have wisdom. And if you look at this, you will see that alongside there is a cognitive process that is happening. The internal process that's happening. There's a physical process. Then there's the internal cognitive process. Our brain is processing that information. And eventually we are developing a belief system. So we're moving from the external, okay, to the internal, from the objective to the subjective, from the concrete to the abstract, and from lots of information overload. We're synthesizing, we're evaluating, as some of you have said, and we are developing knowledge and wisdom. And that knowledge, all right, is that new knowledge you're going to develop. Because in terms of a PhD study, it's really about creating new knowledge and originality. And that's what the examiners, okay, will be using as a benchmark, right, to determine when they are assessing your work, the creation of new knowledge with that PhD study. So here are the assumptions then, clearly. So data, as we know, they have no inherent structure or fixed content, and it's unprocessed information. So when somebody said you need to manage data, right? But is it data that we've added meaning or context to? And therefore information is merely data in context. If we look at it, we've given it structure, we fitted it into categories and patterns, and all through the internal cognitive process. And what we've done is we've endowed it with relevance and purpose. So information is a set of data, but it's organized. This is the difference, the point of departure. It's organized according to patterns of interpretation. So in response to the question that came earlier, what am I organizing to make relevant and to make accessible, right? is up to you, the individual, and how you've gone and categorized and added context in terms of that information. And then knowledge, if we look at knowledge now, and this is where I've said you are going to be creating your knowledge, is that you've interpreted the information, you've combined it with experience and interpretation and reflection, you've transformed the information into answering those research problems for your study, you've internalized it, you've synthesized it, right? And the thing is, it is personal. Anybody can give you information, but because we are unique individuals, the way we interpret, internalize, doesn't necessarily that we're all going to generate that information into knowledge. So there is a subjective nature here. And then wisdom goes further, and it says it's the ability to make use of that knowledge, to predict, to evaluate, etc. So let's look at a practical example. If you're driving along and the red robot flashes at you, right? Red, that's just the code, the numbering code for red. That is data. When you add meaning to that, it says to you that that is a red robot on the corner or the intersection of those particular roads. So that is the information. You're starting to internalize. When you move on and you add the context says that it's a red light that I'm moving towards. And then finally, when we look at applying that particular knowledge to give us wisdom, it says, I've got to hit the brakes and start, pumping those brakes to stop the car. Right? So that's the practical application. A simple thing, like driving along, picking up the red robot means that I must now change down, slow down, pump the brakes, and come to a stop. Okay. The exception to this would be the taxi driver though, right? Okay, it would be different for them. For them it would mean gun it and I'm going through. Okay, right. So you see, it's all about wisdom, it's all about context, etc. Just a little bit of a different focus. Instead of representing this process in the form of a pyramid, it's being inverted in the form of a funnel. Okay? So that's just different representation of it, very similar. And then a further visual representation where, if we look at the top, the funnel at the bottom, at the top, you will see that they put enlightenment. So over and above wisdom, they've added enlightenment into the clarity of perception. Comments, questions? So now we can safely say that there is a difference between data, information, and knowledge. They are not the same thing in terms of the DIKW model. So let's move into a definition then of information management. And I didn't choose the textbook definition purposefully. I chose personal information management. And the reason I did this because, as I said, the PhD is a journey. And it's a balance between your work towards this PhD as well as a balance with your personal life and other activities. And let me tell you, nobody tells you that at the beginning. Right? Many people drop out because of personal circumstances. They'll register, they'll come through and do the PhD, then they'll say, Prof, I have to fall back, I've just taken on a new job. If you're a woman, I've just gotten married, or I'm going to start my family, all right, etc., etc. So the balance has to be there. So this definition of information management really has to be looking at from a personal perspective. So let's look at it. And if you look at what you said earlier, you're going to pick up on what people said, right? So these are activities that you're going to perform in order to acquire, to obtain, to get hold of. Sometimes you actually have to create that information. And you're going to be doing that in the final analysis with the creation of new knowledge. And when it goes into your PhD, it's actually going to be new information on that particular area. You're going to store it. Somebody spoke of storage. You're going to organize it. Somebody spoke of organization. You're going to have to maintain. You're going to have to retrieve. And you're going to have to use and even distribute that information. And it's needed because you have this information need. Why? To meet your life goals, whether it's everyday, whether it's long-term, whether it's work-related or not, and to fulfill your many roles and responsibilities. So the key role for you right now and your major focus is that of being a doctoral student. But remember, you're balancing that role with many other roles and activities in your life, whether it's being a partner, whether it's being a mother, father, employee, etc., member of a community. So that's why I asked you how many of your full-time students, how many of your part-time students, how many of you are working. So we're not going to go into time management because that is possibly another very important topic when you are doing a doctoral study. And if you look at it from a perspective, from a theoretical perspective, you'll see that there is a information management life cycle. Not going to dwell on this, right? Where you have to plan, you have to collect, create, receive, capture, organize, use and disseminate, maintain that information. You may be getting rid of some of that information and you're going back and you are evaluating that information that you're using. Knowledge. There's this question of managing your knowledge. What does this mean? Everybody says knowledge is power.
Knowledge is power.
Harold? Knowledge is power? Okay. Is knowledge power? Okay. The back? I saw a hand there. Go ahead.
Okay. Yes, it's true, knowledge is power, but there is a part for me. If it is only knowledge and it's not being used, then it's not power. So I think wisdom is more important than knowledge. That's converting that knowledge into practice.
Into practice, into application. Right. So we see all these slogan words coming at us. And for me, I'm not a KM manager, I'm an IM manager. That's my perspective as a scholar. So I always say information is power, right? But we have to distinguish between the two because there are two types of knowledge. There's the tacit knowledge that is residing within every one of our minds. That is the data, the information that we've internalized, all right? And we've converted it into knowledge, but it's sitting up here. So I can't see what you've got in there, right? Nobody can. But explicit knowledge is the expressed knowledge. It's the knowledge that is now presented in the form of information. So we can really only deal with explicit knowledge when it comes to information management. So even if you're going to defend your PhD orally, the reality is that we're going to put it in a bound document. And that is the representation, right, of your study as a student. So in essence, you have to do IM, right, and IM is the backbone for KM. So our libraries are going to argue that we manage the knowledge in this institution through our institutional repository, and when a student graduates, they have to lodge that electronic copy with the library, and it sits in the institutional repository. And that is our KM resources, right? But to access those theses and dissertations via the institutional repository, we are accessing them as expressed knowledge or information in the form, the electronic form of your thesis, which we see in the institutional repository. And so for a user, it's presenting itself as information. Data at first, until they read through the sections they want, until they interpret it, until they find, okay, what they're looking for in terms of relevance. So KM brings in the human element, and that's the difference. Another term that we have to come to grips with, an overlapping term, is the concept of information literacy. So there are two sets of skills in information literacy. There's your library skills and there's your information skills. And without either of those skills, you can't do information management. And if we look at a definition of information literacy, you will see the overlap. Three things come out, right? Find it, evaluate it, and use it. We saw that in IM. We see it again in information literacy. So you look at information literacy, and it's a process of actually acquiring knowledge eventually. And linked to this is the big buzzword now, and everybody's saying, over and above that, we need to be digitally literate. Again, if you look at digital literacy, very simple. The finding of information is crucial within digital literacy. So what we're seeing is an overlapping of concepts, right? And essentially these are all competencies and skills that we have to do proper information management. Okay, I apologize. Because now we were going to map, right, the information management skills through those definitions that we have. So let me talk about those definitions on information literacy. And we have the Chartered Institute of Library and Information Professionals, they're in the UK. We also have a South African association and an American association. And if we look at it, apologies, let me see if I can bring it back up, because it's just booted us out. Right, so while it's trying to power up again, if we look at it, essentially, the skills and the competencies that we require to do good information management is the first one is a need for information. That one is undeniable. We said it earlier, you have to use those library or information resources, right, to help you with your study. No question about that one. Okay? The second need is the resources available. So where do you start with those library resources? Do you go through the entire library? Right? That's not possible. So your library skills, your information searching and retrieval skills now come through in terms of allocating and looking for the relevant information resources. Then, how do you go about finding the information in those resources? What we will do is we'll make the presentation available, all right, to everybody. Then the need to evaluate what you found, because what you're finding may not be relevant as you're doing your literature search. We know that. How then do we work with that information when we're doing our analysis? The ethics and the responsibility that comes with using that information, the issues there that we need to unpack, how we're going to communicate the repackaged information, the new knowledge that we've created and shared. Obvious, you know that you're going to do a thesis, but we also know that you're not finished with just a thesis as a PhD scholar, right? And then how will you manage your data at the end? So the data curation process is also a parallel process that is happening as you're going through. So let's talk about why you need the information. Why do you need information? Okay, don't be distracted by them. Thank you.
Guys, the project is not too high. So we are installing it.
Okay, let's talk about it. Why do you need information? Yes, we know you want to conduct your study, but let's drill down now. To make decisions, right? To make informed decisions, to solve a problem, right? So what problem are you wanting to solve with the PhD study? Let's map it to your PhD study now, right? The research problem. So you formulated your research problem. You want to answer and provide a response to that research problem. And you need information for that. Yes? Correct? No? Yes. How are you going to answer the research problem? By conducting the study. Right? Conceptual or theoretical framework. How do you know which conceptual or theoretical framework to adopt for the study? Informed by the research problem. When you identify them, you need information on them. You need to review them, you need to evaluate them, right? To decide, you need to justify why I've adopted that particular conceptual approach or why I've adopted that particular theoretical approach. Correct? And so you're reading, you require information around that. Then you move on from your literature review and you go to your methodology. How do you decide what are the appropriate methods for this particular study? Go back to the research problem. So whether I do mixed methods, quants, quals, right? Link back to the information research problem, but I need additional information. Right? Also, in the literature review, who else was adopting that methodology? Were similar studies adopting that methodology to the one that I'm proposing? All right? So, you need, in terms of that information need, this is the information you require. Presentation and discussion of your results. Right? Okay, lovely. The one advantage is that I'm not talking down to you anymore. Now it's more or less at the same level. So, when you're presenting, right, you've done your data analysis and you present your results. What's the best way to present that result? Okay? Do you do the discussion immediately? Or the interpretation? How do you make these decisions? That's my point. How are you deciding? How are you making these decisions? Yes, sir.
Yes, it will depend with the nature of the results. That is to say, if they are quantitative in nature or they are numeric, I might want to use tables and graphs. Yeah, but then if they are qualitative, you might have to use paragraphs.
Okay. And how do you arrive at that decision? You just sit there and you say, well, I think it's going to be the best approach. And I think I will be able to. Right?
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, you might want to be able to understand exactly that. Like others as well. Yeah, and yeah, the nature of the
Okay. So to make this important, these are big questions, these are big decisions that you're grappling with right now. And the reality is that you require information from all of these. You will be reading up on the various methods. You will be deciding which ones are appropriate. You will be looking at other studies conducted to see if these methods are applicable to your study. So essentially you're working through the information, and while you're producing this new knowledge area, okay, at the same time you're utilizing information, right, to make that informed decision and to solve this problem, right? In your case, the research problem. Thank you, sir. where we were, the mapping, okay, of these IM skills now. So what I'm showing you is that throughout this process, and can you all see over my head, huh? You can see the screen. So I can't stand in front of you. That throughout this process, you have actually been subconsciously applying your information management competencies. Okay? The next set, the resources available. Now, I assume that everybody's done library orientation. So who did their masters with us at UKZN? Come, stick your hand up. Hi. Right, you are scholars at the top of your game. You're PhD candidates. You've got to have more confidence, right? I know the process is overwhelming to actually make us go, whoa, what did I sign up for? Okay? But just tell yourself you're one of the privileged few, okay? And you've made it. You're there, right? So when we look at this now, the resources available, we're looking at your library skills, right? And don't forget that people are also sources of information. So your interactions with other students, your supervisor, your subject librarian are vital in terms of your information management skills. So everybody knows who their subject librarian is? Oh, now I'm worried. Okay, how are you doing this study? Okay. They're supposed to be your biggest ally in terms of finding those information resources. Right? Anybody want to disagree? So how are you finding your sources? Everybody did library orientation. I see something which I can do.
Can I ask a question?
You orientated yourself.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
What do you need from the subject librarian? That I'm uncertain about.
Okay, good question. What do I need from the subject librarian?
Because when I ask the question, she refers me to someone else.
Sometimes you found that when you're trying to get the information yourself, you can't access the right site. So they have access to all the sites. You send your request to them. They can get any article that you have seen you interested in and you can get all of it at your own. And they are the best that they can get the right information in terms of sifting according to your topic, according to your problem, according to the areas of the literature review that you want to touch on. When you sit down with them, they will also tell you which journals that will have the best information in your subject area that you can do, and also advise whether you have access or you can apply through them to give you the access so that you can get that done as well.
Okay. Right. So you can see how important they are in assisting you in locating those relevant information resources. What I will say to you is that if at the moment you're struggling in terms of engagement, try to cultivate that relationship with them, because they will be your ally in locating those vital information resources. How to find the information? You spoke about the topic analysis, crucial. You will not find relevant information resources if you haven't done the topic analysis, looked at the hierarchy of the terms, okay, and how they relate to one another. And then those terms actually become your keywords for searching your online bibliographic resources. So it's crucial to do the topic analysis. And that process can be done in what we call your interview with your subject librarian. So they will steer you in the right direction in terms of locating the relevant information resources. Okay? So your library skills are important, and at this level, any scholar has to have good good lively skills, good information skills. There's a parallel set of competencies that you're developing. You're developing as the expert in that area, right? But you're also developing as a scholar and a researcher. Your dean of research will tell you that. So there are two sets of skills that you're picking up on as you're going through this process. And the information management skills that you pick up are the skills that you will apply further on when you start publishing, okay, and claiming your space, when you come back, when you invite you to be an expert with a lecturer, all right? So these are lifelong learning skills that you take with you in terms of information management. How to evaluate the information that you find. Not everything that you find firsthand is going to be relevant. It may be inappropriate. There may be limitations in that study. When you go through the methodology that they adopted, it looks like very relevant. You say, no, this methodology when I evaluate it, not relevant, wasn't applied properly. Okay? So I'm not going to use this study. Or when I'm doing my literature review, I'm going to comment and say what the problems were with that study. Okay? So this is your information skills that are coming through, the ability to evaluate. And when I finish up, you will see that all these IM skills can be mapped to what we call Bloom's taxonomy. Have you heard of Bloom's taxonomy? Right? It's about moving from lower order thinking to critical thinking at the end. And subconsciously, this is what you're doing in your process, right, as a doctoral student or doctoral candidate. How do you work with, how do you exploit those results? This is your analysis and the synthesis of the information that you get. Crucial, very crucial. We spoke about it earlier, so I'm not going to say much. But in that analysis, you're looking at your critical thinking skills. You are looking at, if I can just see there, your reasoning, your evaluating, your analysis, and your synthesis. Stop me if there's any comments or questions. The ethics and responsible use, very important. I think everybody is familiar, and I just heard that Prof. Vassana is coming and he's going to talk to you about the UK's research ethics policy, right, in more detail. You as a scholar have to be familiar and conduct yourself in an ethical manner, very important, right? So you're looking at your informed consent, your voluntary participation, the right for them to withdraw at any time, you need to guarantee anonymity, confidentiality, etc. And these are checks that you would have done already in your informed consent with the ethical clearance application, with the proposal. Plagiarism. Ethical use of the information. If it's not yours, acknowledge it. As simple as that. Okay? You're going to have to run it through time again before you can submit it for examination. And they're going to tell you, termed in as a similarity index, so they're going to tell you just what percentage, okay, is fit for a UKZN standard. And I don't want to quote it, I know what it is in the humanities, it might be very different in law and management. So essentially in the humanities you can't go over a 15% similarity index. What do you mean by similarity? The words, the phrases that are similar to everybody else's. So you can get up to 1% of the qualitative approach is, it sees it as similar, right? According to so-and-so, and that's the popular author in that field, and everybody's writing about that author, that phrase will be seen as similar. So it's a similarity index. And then somebody mentioned it, it was mentioned here, referencing. So what method of referencing are you adopting? Okay. Are you adopting a consistent, okay, formatting? Is your punctuation consistent? So when your three examiners are looking at it, okay, Could be 2 local, 1 external, could be 1 local, internal, 2 international, right? Or could be all international, looking at the PhD study. They're going to be marking you for your referencing technique. For accuracy, consistency, punctuation is a consistent. Capitalization is a consistent, etc. Format is a consistent. How to communicate and share the information that you put together. Very simple. Alright? You know you've got your thesis with your presentation and interpretation, but you've also got publication thereafter. So for every student that I have supervised, I've insisted that we publish. Right? Because the process is never done until we are published. So the process, as we said, you've got to communicate your results. How many of us go back once we've graduated and say to our participants, can I come and meet with you for an informal chat, for a workshop, for a seminar, just to tell you what I found? Right? We've done, got our red gowns, right? So communicating your results, ethical use is also about going back and informing the participants of what we found. Copyright and intellectual property is very big. So UKZN tells you to sign off on the intellectual property when you're submitting the documentation. All the data, the dissertation belongs to UKZN. Right? And you can't go out and say, this is my personal work and I will get personal gain of it, because the IP rests with UKZN. Copyright, when you publish, you're going to cede that right to the publisher. That's a reality for us, right? So, thereafter, if we want to make use of our own work, right, it's no longer ours, it belongs to the publisher, and the access that we spoke about by the library might be limited. But we acknowledge that we no longer have the copyright once we say yes to that particular journal to publish our work. And then, managing the data is important. And it comes back to this point that we're going to have to answer now. The question about what do I do? How do I store? How do I manage? Right? UKZN at the moment does not have a data curation strategy. We are working towards it. And many academic institutions in South Africa do not have a data management strategy. So yes, they ask us for the one copy, the electronic copy of the PhD, but nobody says, please lodge your SPSS data set with the research office. Right? So you start now sitting there, you say in your ethical clearance, I've got it on a password protected file, okay, locked away in my supervisor's cupboard, right? And when we look at the ethical clearance application, it says to us that we must keep that data, all the data. For us it's information because we internalize it, we're the experts in that knowledge area now. But if somebody else wants access to your data to make use of it, they should be able to use it because it all belongs to UKZN. Right? What files, what format? Will they take in Viva? Will they take SPSS? Will they take Excel? Right? So the computer science issues of interoperability come in, how long we can keep it for, will it be accessible, when the software has changed, when the hardware has changed, etc. Those are all issues we're going to have to consider when we're talking about data curation. Right, were there any comments or questions? And then, looking at Bloom's taxonomy, now remember I said, whatever we're doing in this ION process, we can map it to Bloom's taxonomy. Very important. And you're going through this process, like it or not. And eventually, at the peak of that process, when you look at it, is the creation of new knowledge. And that's what you're going But when we look at the part that says apply, it leads it back to information in a new situation. And that new situation is your research problem that you are tackling, essentially. Then your analysis, your presentation, and your interpretation requires you all the way through to the creation of that new knowledge. Right. Comments? Questions? None? Yes, sir.
Is that something that can be learned or you creation?
Okay. Can it be learned? Right? Or is it in you? So, you want to respond? Sure.
What I understand is that when you equip yourself with a lot of data today or a lot of information, at first that's where you will discover the problem because you identify the gap. There is still a system and technology gap too. So when you identify the gap, using the information that you have through tests, then you create a new solution because that's a new information will be based on your own findings from the research. So that's the creation.
Okay. So what she's saying is, right up from the bottom to the top, there's lots of learning that is going on. Okay? So yes, it certainly is a learning process at the end, right? And you walk away, like I said earlier, with two skill sets. The ability to conduct research as a researcher, but at the same time, the expert in that field or that knowledge area. Further comments or questions before we unpack, right, some useful tips on doing IM.
You need to find the focus group. You need to affect yourself with the aspect on that information that you are working on. So let's say you are doing like my supervisor always says, we'll try to find the alignment and theoretical premise that they have been there from the 1960s, but they still apply. So how you need to develop that because you cannot keep on citing Maslow in 1965, but someone has cited Maslow in 1970 and sort of added some information that is making it keep on being useful. So you need to be able to track the origin and the scholars that have been developed from that origin of that theoretical funding to date because they have an up-to-date information. So before you start going on the research, go and do a research who are the experts currently. You may be surprised that the experts are in the own discipline. You don't even have to move out. You can just make an appointment and you go professors or doctors. They will have the fast knowledge that you need.
Okay. This leads us to the issue of decolonization as an angle. Because the reality is that when we're creating new knowledge, our context is unique here in Southern Africa and in South Africa. And so a Western model that has been used by Maslow for so many years, right, in a psychological setting. Yes, you have to unpack the origin, you have to say how it's been revised, why it's still relevant, and then you've got to adapt it for the context. Is it going to answer the challenges that we face? Right? Because research is always linked to development, ultimately. So you're going are managing the information that you are acquiring as a PhD student. And also, let's talk about your challenges then. What are some of your challenges with information management? How are you managing information? Somebody said, what's happening? I've got these 3 books, I read them, then what do I do? How do I keep that information? Am I typing out my the notes that I'm scribbling? Am I putting them straight into my literature review and starting to discuss? How are you managing all this information? There's so much information. You're reading so much. Got all these copies, downloads of articles, books that you're going through. 90 days, right? 15 months. So I'm going to get through them. So how are you keeping and managing this information? There's some hands here.
I wanted to cite some challenges.
Go ahead with the challenges.
Too much information is very practical. Sometimes you have to download. But in my case, I have been using English, like helpful, information management.
What have you been using?
A software for
Mendel. Right. Anybody else using software? Before I come to you, there was just gentlemen. We come back to you. EndNote. Okay?
Yeah, thank you. I've also been using EndNote. And also what I've done is, in addition to EndNote, I've also created folders for specific topics. And in that folder, I make sure religiously that each time I get an article, I search in that folder and a different topic. And I use the author's name rather than the topic. Somehow it gives some data to me, so that's how I because it's easy to get overwhelmed. Yeah.
Okay.
I also use EndNote, but what I wanted to say is that use it to that way, it will give you the skills. But there's so much you can do under EndNote. You can have folder, you can even cut and paste it. That's something that you want and you know even the case. So once you have a workshop with case, I was explaining to show you all the tricks that are the useful tool and free.
Okay. So EndNote, for those of you who haven't used it, you must. Is a reference manager, and it allows you to create a library of all your information resources. And then you can open up a library and pull those information resources into EndNote. So has everybody been for EndNote training? Who's been for EndNote training? Put your hands up high, come on. Right, for those of you who are not using EndNote, you need to start using EndNote. And if you run at the end and you're really taking all the data, right, and you're doing your data, your findings chapter, right, then you'll be working harder instead of smarter. Other challenges or questions?
If say, for instance, you don't have the Mendeley and EndNote, then you resort to Google Maps. Whenever you touch it, whenever you get a reference, you just enter it into the computer and you got it there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yes, some tips. Right? And they're the simple ones. Look at it logically. You are building up this thesis chapter by chapter. So you can focus, right, your energy on a chapter by chapter, okay, breakdown. So after each chapter, I insist, I say to all my students, I will not read that chapter unless you've given me the list of references at the end of that chapter. I want to see your references for the chapter. Okay? And in that way, we're doing 2 things. You are finalizing the list of work cited in your reference list for that chapter. When they are done, I also say to them, open up your main file Any acronyms or abbreviations, you can then move them into your list of acronyms and abbreviations. And also, in that final file, you can open up and start doing your automatic content page. So by the time we get to the last chapter, which is your conclusions, summary and recommendations, you have 95% okay, of your thesis. And all we're doing is putting in the final chapter. So there's no running around with, where's my references, where's this, where's that. When we finalize a table or a figure, we put it after every chapter into the list of tables, list of figures. So it's a systematic way of working through the thesis. So that's one of the tips that we can use. You have to know how to use your referencing method. Very important. So all of you are adopting Harvard, right? Because it's the sanctioned one. In the humanities, we use Harvard, the author date system. But whatever you do, you've got to do it accurately and consistently. As a method, you may even vary the Harvard. But when you vary, that variation must be adopted accurately and consistently. So, for example, if you take the title of journal, they're always in italics. Do you capitalize, okay, or do you lowercase? Up to you. You can decide what you want to do. But whatever you do, you have to do it accurately and consistently throughout. And that's what they're going to look at when they're marking you. And then what I put there is also familiarizing yourself, and you said it, with your library information resources, with your referencing method, and then backing up and saving everything. I don't know what it is, but often you hear people say, you know, my laptop was stolen. Now, my heart just goes, because if you're a PhD and that's the only place you keep it, on the C drive, then no, there's too much. I don't even want to talk about it. It's too emotional for me, and I'm not even a PhD student, right? So, save, but not to two different drives, right? I have the habit of actually emailing the latest thing I work on with the time and the date. That's my third backup of everything I do. Email myself a copy, right? It is vital. Get into the habit of doing that. And when you save, please save with the date and the time, because everything looks the same. How many times I've examined for numerous institutions, international institutions, and you get the file, and the final check, the student prints out the wrong file. And it goes to examination. And then you say, but now, I'm looking to pass you. An average pass, 50 to 68% range. But we haven't managed the information resource properly. Too much at risk if we don't manage those files properly. Okay? So the comments, questions, suggestions. So now, give us your problem again, and then you can respond to it. Okay, for which chapter? Right, so that's where we started. We started on a chapter by chapter basis. So you should have a file for each chapter, right? Linked to that file, you will have your references that you've got. Linked to that file, all your information, your analysis, your synthesis. Because as you're working along through that chapter, you are drafting a particular chapter. So my advice is a folder for each chapter, and then a folder, a final folder for the entire thesis. And if you want to, you can have, before you go into the final, a list of references as well. But it's not needed because if you're using EndNote, it will be very EndNote for you. And the nice thing about EndNote is you can tell it to put it in the Harvard format for you. So you're working smarter instead of harder. And when you go to most online resources and journal articles, it will ask you, there'll be an option to cite. You click on the cite option, you say, this is how I want you to cite it. And then pull it into your, either into your chapter or pull it into your library within EndNote. So you can be very creative in terms of how you manage this information. Okay? You okay? You're looking there like, I've got a frown on my face. Are you happy? Okay? So, in 1.5 hours, like I said, all I can really do is highlight, okay, the concepts, the challenges you may be facing, and look at some practical examples to help you with the process. Right? Any further comments or questions before we close off the session? I just want to say there is a register. Where's the register? Has everybody signed the register?
No.
Okay, we'll just bring it. Yeah? We'll just pass it back for those who haven't. Comments, questions?
Hi, Bob. I found this issue quite interesting and useful. Thank you. And I think what's also nice is you've come down to my level in terms of making me understand. It would be nice if you could then maybe going forward could charge maybe the practical side, because I'm finding it to be extremely useful and issue the guidelines to doing it now. I would love to physically see it being done, especially when it comes to like the skills that you're teaching us, putting it into a certain folder. It seems, just the discussions with those students, it seems like it all do things differently. And there's no uniform way of teaching us that. So it would be helpful to me if we can see, like if you have a practical class showing that to us. So no false viewers. I'm just saying, just as a guide going forward, just to see thank you.
Thanks for that. I think kudos to the Graduate School of Business for having these doctoral program. Alright. Where I come from, we've just started a doctoral program. So you are doing well, and I think we must take this feedback. There is an evaluation form that I'm going to give you. Alright. So please, and I think it's the first time that they've asked for, may have been, Doc, you don't know, you've done these programs before, to include these newer topics like information management. I know the traditional ones like this, how to write a proposal, how to construct a research problem, how to do good literature review, those are the common ones. But kudos to the, like I said, the school for bringing in the topics that are the overall topics that are going to help us keep the chapter. Okay? So it's a good start, and I think moving forward, if we were in the land, we could then work through a practical example in the future. And it can't be done at the end, unfortunately. Like I said, some of you might be, who's submitting for examination in November? Nobody. Okay, fine. So then that's fine. Okay? Because if we had somebody here submitting in November, they're probably not here and think, I'm done. You know, what new are you going to teach me now? You know, I've been through all the agony, I've suffered in silence, okay? And now you tell me to come to this workshop in IM. It's not a workshop, it's actually just a seminar discussion on what IM is, right? So maybe it should be right at the beginning. As soon as you come on board, as part of the orientation process, this is what we need to do in terms of managing your information resources. People, what is our timeline? 10:21, 10 minutes. Any last comments or questions? Gentlemen at the back?
Just a question for me. Are we any chance going to flight?
I'm sure we can, yes, I can email the slides to Jim and he can circulate them.
At the end of this warm session, the full session, but the slides will be emailed to everybody.
Okay. So you will get them.
Thank you.
All right. like a supervisor, but Doc is also here. So let's try, let's see if we can try and help you.
Okay. Now we are putting on my phone. On the other,
But if it's related to this, to the information management process. All right?
I wanted, I don't know whether you're familiar with this new thing on the literature review, that they call it systematic literature review.
Okay.
It was presented to us once. I think it was a 30-minute thing. I wish to hear the half of that again. If someone can just highlight, because it took my breath away. But now, because it was a short presentation, I can't recall, like I can't really understand, because that lady had a lot of things and had sort of a funded approach, but it was systematical. There was that thing that keep on coming back, it's systematical. It's not as traditional as we are doing currently.
It's related to information management.
Related to information management.
Yeah, sort of. So the way that I doing my literature, I have the Excel sheet, and then I break it up into the 3 literature chapters, and then into subtopics, and then break that up further. So as I'm reading, I fill it into different kinds of information into the subtopics. So it's easier to filter down and to go further. So that's somehow how the systematic literature works. Is that you find a larger topic and then you relate it to other things.
Okay.
Systematically.
I'm really getting some of this because I'm not seeing the content of
Okay.
So the first and the most thing you have to do while using literature review is simply go on Google and search for a systematic literature review just on your phone. So you will find an article who has been systematically
you will see up here that I put there how to find your information, right? The development of a search strategy. Now, when you're training our library information professional, what you've just articulated is exactly what we do, all right, for the training of list professionals. So, when you say systematic, there's also another understanding. That is your approach to finding your information search strategy that you've unpacked, all right? But having found the information, a systematic analysis is something different, okay? And it's systematic in terms of how it relates to the research problem, how you are unpacking that research problem in your analysis. So there is a conceptual analysis of how you are interpreting. There's interpretation in the literature review. So there are two things. The one is your search strategy, being systematic, and then systematic literature review, okay, is the review of that literature in a systematic way, dependent on your research problem and the variables or their hypotheses that you may or may not be testing. Okay, so there are two separate things in reality. The development of the search strategy, if that's what we want to talk about in future, please put it down, okay, in the evaluations. Because that's what we actually cover. Referencing, that is what we cover with list professionals when we train them. Topic analysis, coming up with the keywords that you just discussed. Setting parameters, using your Boolean, using your truncation, right? Using your warm parts to search for the best results. Which are the most appropriate databases in that particular subject area? All that is your library skills and your knowledge of the resources. And that is why I said to you, sorry, have you been to library orientation? And it's not just good enough to be going to library orientation. You have to cultivate that relationship with your subject librarian. Because all the information that she's just touched on developing that search strategy and systematically searching through literature and available resources can only be done, all right, when you bring the necessary knowledge and skills. And that's where the subject librarian will come in. Right. Thank you so much.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I'm not very clear what the use of footnotes in a list.
It's your method, okay, of referencing. Footnotes, if that's the method that you're going to adopt, remember there's endnotes and there's footnotes, right? An endnote, for example, right, will say, if I want to give more information on something that is in the text, then I can put it at the bottom of that particular page. And it may include a reference. But footnotes, I know law, you use that particular method, all right? We don't have a list of work cited at the end. So it's a methodology, and if that's the methodology that your discipline wants you to adopt, then I say please familiarize yourself with it. But generally in the entire world, there are only two referencing methods. There's MLA and ALA. Modern Languages Association, right? Which the arts use, the language people use, and ALA, which we are all using. Social science, humanities, okay, and law and management use a derivative of ALA, American Library Association. And that derivative, like I said, is either author date or it is the Harvard method. And they are referencing books in the library, right? Chicago Manual of Style is the authoritative text on how to reference. So besides your referencing guides that you have, go and speak to the library. The library's also got a referencing guide that you can adopt. But as you sit here now, you need to know what guide you're going to be using. And with your lecturer, are you going to be using those footnotes? Okay. yourself, empower yourself, right, with knowledge, very important. Don't make the journey one where you're bewildered and you're lost. You have to be hungry for that information, to turn it into knowledge, and then use it, apply it, so that you gain the wisdom in terms of the process. Right, thank you everyone.